Did you know that Ares, the Greek god of war, was usually depicted negatively, while the goddess Athena, also associated with warfare, was not? Hello and welcome to World History Encyclopedia. My name is Kelly and today's video is all about probably the least popular god in the Greek pantheon, Ares, the god of war. Don't forget, the easiest way to support us is by giving this video a thumbs up, subscribing to our channel and hitting that bell icon for notifications so you don't miss out on any new uploads. World History Encyclopedia is a non-profit organisation and you can find us on Patreon, a brilliant site where you can support our work and receive exclusive benefits in return. Your support helps us create videos twice a week, so make sure to check it out via the pop-up in the top corner of the screen or via the Patreon link down below. Ares was the ancient Greek god of war and is described in Hesiod's Theogony as shield-piercing Ares and city-sacking Ares. While Athena was the goddess of warcraft and strategy, Ares was the god of the brutal, violent and bloody side of war and loved war for war's sake. He was the son of Zeus and Hera and had two siblings, Aletheia, the goddess of childbirth and labour pains, and Hebe, the goddess of youth and a cupbearer of the gods. Although in Homer's Iliad, Eris, the goddess of strife, is also named a sister of Ares. Ares never married, but did fall in love with the goddess of love, Aphrodite, who in turn was married to Hephaestus, the god of metallurgy. And together they had a bunch of kids: Deimos, the god of terror and dread, Phobos, the god of panic and fear, Eros, the god of love, Anteros, the god of either requited love or unrequited love, and Harmonia, the goddess of harmony. He also had a whole bunch of mortal kids, as many of the Greek gods do, including the Amazons, Alcippe, Diomedes, Kyknos, and as Mars, his Roman equivalent, Romulus and Remus. Ares had an unquenchable thirst for conflict, and in the stories, he's often seen in Greek myths accompanied by Phobos and Deimos, as well as his sister Eris and his charioteer Enyo. Ares was associated with the serpent and some birds, like the vulture, and he was depicted either wearing or holding his helm, and sometimes with a shield and spear or a sheathed sword. These common military attributes often makes it hard to distinguish Ares from other warrior figures in Greek art. Sometimes he was depicted on a chariot being pulled by fire-breathing horses, and his battle with Heracles, which we will get to very soon, was a popular subject for 6th century BCE Attic vases. When Hera gave birth to Hephaestus, she was ashamed that he was ugly and crippled, and so she cast him from Olympus and he landed on the island of Lemnos. He was cared for by Thetis and perhaps the daughter of Oceanus, Eurynome, and constructed his workshop on the island's volcano and became a skilled metalsmith. Unsurprisingly, Hephaestus was very unimpressed with the way his mother had treated him, and so he sent some gifts to Olympus, and one of them was a golden throne for Hera. The second Hera sat down, she was bound fast by invisible chains, and Hephaestus would only release her if she agreed to his marriage to Aphrodite. Of course, as we know already, Aphrodite was very unfaithful to Hephaestus and had numerous affairs with Ares. Hephaestus didn't just sit back and let this happen though. Oh no. In Book 8 of the Odyssey, you will find the story of how Hephaestus was told by Helios, the son, of his wife's infidelity. Hephaestus worked on invisible chains that couldn't be broken, and then covered his marriage bed with the chains. Hephaestus pretended to leave for the town of Lemnos, but Ares was watching and waiting, and once Hephaestus left, Ares entered the home where Aphrodite had just returned from visiting Zeus. The two went to the bed and were immediately bound by Hephaestus's invisible net. Hephaestus returned and called upon all the Olympians to have a look at the adulterous pair held captive, to which all the gods roared with laughter. In Homer's Iliad, Ares was on the side of the Trojans. He is shown sometimes leading them into battle alongside Hector, and is depicted in a pretty negative light, with epithets like hateful, the man-killer, the war-glutton, and the curse of men. Although he is the god of bloodthirsty war, he is shown to be weaker than the goddess Athena, who knocks him out with a large rock, and he loses a fight with the Achaean hero Diomedes, who even manages to injure the god with his spear, although Diomedes was getting a bit of help from Athena. After being injured, his scream is described as like the shouts of 10,000 men, and then he retreats to Olympus for healing. Ares and the mortal hero Heracles were often in conflict with each other, beginning with 2 of Heracles' 12 labours, including children of Ares. One of Heracles' labours was to retrieve the mares of Diomedes. Diomedes was a son of Ares and his mares were man-eating, so Heracles fed Diomedes to the mares and thereby completed his labour. The second was when Heracles had to retrieve the girdle from Hippolyta, who was an Amazon and daughter of Ares. Initially, Heracles was welcomed by the Amazons until a rumour spread that he was actually going to capture Hippolyta, who was the queen of the Amazons at the time, and then enslave them all. This rumour brought on a battle, and according to one version of the myth, during the fight, Heracles killed Hippolyta, took the belt, and left. Although another version of the story tells it a bit more peacefully, and no one dies. Another confrontation between Ares and Heracles is known from the ancient poem The Shield of Heracles, which was written in the style of Hesiod, but is now believed to have been written by someone else later on. Kyknos was a son of Ares who would invite guests over for dinner and then murder them, and he would rob pilgrims who were on their way to the sanctuary of Apollo. One day, Heracles and his nephew Iolaus were travelling and met Kyknos and Ares. They all stopped by the sanctuary of Apollo, and Kyknos challenged Heracles to a fight. Heracles wins the battle and kills Kyknos, and then in revenge, Ares tries to kill Heracles, but the hero has Athena on his side. Ares is wounded by Heracles in the thigh and begins to weep before his sons Phobos and Deimos take him back to Olympus for healing. Of course, there are a couple of myths where Ares isn't the bad guy, like how after Sisyphus, the man who cheated death twice, bound Thanatos, the personification of death, in Hades, and then escaped the underworld back to life. Ares was the one to free Thanatos from his bonds. And when the twin giants Otus and Ephialtes tried to storm Olympus by stacking mountains on top of each other, Ares was bound by the giants and imprisoned in a bronze jar or cauldron for a whole year until he was freed by Hermes. In myth, Ares was accused of killing Halirrhothios, the son of Poseidon, near a stream below the Athenian Acropolis. On a hill near the stream, a special court known as the Areopagos was convened to hear the case. Ares was acquitted when it was revealed that Halirrhothios had forced himself upon his daughter Alcippe, and from then on in Athens, the Areopagus was the place for trials that involved murder and impiety, as well as other issues, of course. There weren't many temples to Ares, but he was held in great esteem in Sparta, a Greek city-state with a strong militaristic culture. Although he wasn't widely worshipped, cult sites with temples to Ares have been found on Crete, and he was mentioned in the Linear B tablets found at Knossos, the great palace complex of Crete, at Argos, Athens, Megalopolis, and Tegea, among other places. He also had a cult in Thrace, and was popular among the Colchians on the Black Sea. Why do you think the ancient Greeks had 2 different gods, Ares and Athena, responsible for different aspects of war, rather than one single war deity? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on our new videos every Tuesday and Friday. This video was brought to you by World History Encyclopedia. For more great articles and interactive content, head to our website via the link below. If you like my shirt, you can find this design and a bunch more at apricusclothing.ca, or you can find a link for it down below. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon with another video.